If you want to be working more on your business, those repeatable processes almost always are something that you can hand off to somebody else.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm excited today to be joined by Emily Hunkler, who's the COO at GoWP, a firm that provides white label WordPress development for your agency and are also getting into hiring and placement. So we'll be interested to dig into that. And today we're going to unpack contractors and freelancers. Should you hire them? Should you not? How do you figure that out? And what are the keys to making those kinds of relationships successful? So with all of that, Emily, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Marcel. Thanks.
So we connected a while ago through GoWP. We did some content together back then for your audience. And now I'm excited to have you on the show. Before we dive into the topic du jour, I want to give everyone some context on how you got into this industry and what led you to starting GoWP in the first place.
Yeah, so my background's in marketing, and I joined the GoWP team 5 years ago now as a marketing manager. And GoWP was started by our founder, Brad Morrison, who lots of folks in this industry know, and basically as a solution to a problem. It was a need that wasn't being met. He was an agency owner, started doing white label services for other agencies that he knew and made contact with. And website maintenance was just a big thing that agency owners didn't want to deal with. They wanted to build sites. They wanted to, design sites, do the marketing, not maintain websites. So there was this big pain point. He saw it, he identified it, and he really just niched down to just that. So when GoWP was founded, it was website maintenance. It was a month-to-month maintenance service, 24/7 content updates for agencies and direct businesses. After a couple of years, they stopped serving direct businesses and just marketed to agencies. That's when I came in. And since then, our goal is just to help agency owners grow and scale. Our slogan is to create happiness. So when we see a problem that, several of our customers are having or people are talking about in our community, we figure out how we can fill that gap and what we can do to create a solution for it. And that's where also the placement and the hiring and that service was born out of that as well.
Awesome. And GoWP has been early to a trend that I see picking up even more steam now than I ever imagined that it would, which is this idea of providing a white label backend team or really providing a way for an agency to expand their service offering without having to bring all of the overhead, all of the operational complexity of hiring that team internally. And I'm seeing that pick up a lot of steam. I have a thesis that a lot of the future of how agencies are going to be structured is going to involve more and more of that kind of thing. What is your take on where we're going with contractors and freelancers? What have you observed from your client base and what you're hearing from agencies that you're working with in terms of their appetite for this kind of help?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with kind of that direction, because what agency owners need, is that elastic team. I know if folks are listening to this as agency owners, there's a roller coaster that comes with it, right? There's the feast or famine. There's when you just can't fathom taking on another project because your pipeline's so full. And there's a time where you're just hoping and wishing that you don't have to lay off team members because you don't have any projects in the pipeline. That's when you have a team of full-time hires, right? You really have to maintain the revenue in order to support that. If you're able to build these elastic teams, whether that's with freelance and contractors, whether that's through partnering with other agencies that specialize in different areas that you do, it's definitely a trend we're seeing. Agencies have customers that come to them because they specialize in, building an e-commerce site, but they want to run PPC campaigns. So what do? Do you refer them out to a completely different agency that also maybe builds e-commerce sites and you might risk losing that customer down the road? Or do you bring in a PPC specialist on a contract basis? Or do you reach out to a contact that you have that does PPC and bring them in as on a white label kind of agreement there and servicing your customers under your brand. So I think being able to do that, having the resources to do that, is really integral to growing in the agency space right now. And that's really what we hope to be able to do. Right now, we have developers, copywriters, designers, virtual assistants. We would love to have a network of sales development representatives, PPC campaign managers, SEOs, all of those things that when an agency owner needs a specialist, needs someone on a contract basis, they don't have to go through a months-long process to find that person in order to fulfill a service that a customer needs now.
Yeah. And so there's a bunch of things that I want to dig into today. The first is really determining, when is it appropriate? What is the context where it makes sense to bring in freelancers, contractors, or bake that into your model versus building an in-house team? Because I think, of course, there's a balance, and both of those things generally are going to need to be true as you scale up as a business. The other thing I want to talk about are some of the misconceptions or concerns or negative experiences that people have had trying to do this and how to avoid them and set this up for success. And the third thing that I want to make sure that we touch on today are the different ways to arrange those contracts and compensation mechanisms, because of course there's so many different ways that you can set up an engagement with a freelancer or contractor. You can pay them by the project. In some cases, you're retaining them for a certain amount of time. In other cases, you're paying them by the hour. And there's different contexts where it might make more or less sense to use one of those models versus another. So those are three things I want to touch on. But before we do that, I want to second what you just said, which is we're also seeing this trend. Some of the most profitable agencies that we've audited are really, really deliberate about what their core strengths are and what they build an internal team around, and are really good at staying disciplined and saying, no, we're going to use partner agencies or referral partnerships or freelancers to still offer things to our clients that they want and that they're asking for, but without adding a whole bunch of operational drag and complexity to our business that is in an area that we're not really passionate about, we're not excellent at, and frankly is not the core thing that makes us amazing. And I think that because the industry has really leaned into specialization over the last decade, we've become very fragmented. And this is a way for agencies to remain disciplined in that specialization, because there's a lot of advantages to it, but still be able to provide that more holistic service to their clients. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too with this. And we're seeing it in the numbers. It is leading to more profit. So definitely second that. And I think we're aligned in terms of where it's going. So let's talk about number one, when should an agency be thinking about freelancers, contractors versus in-house team? How do you make that decision or that assessment?
Yeah, I think in-house team members, it's a big upfront investment. I would say you're looking at a hiring pipeline, you're looking at onboarding, making them a true team member. It's not going to be necessarily you find someone quick and they hit the ground running, right? That is very seldom the case, unless you have a referral from a trusted friend who's worked with somebody for years and you know for sure, right? So it's a big upfront investment. I think a lot of times the ideal situation is kind of that start on a contract basis. Bring someone in for work that you have that you need to get done that you're not going to do. Bring them in on a contract basis. They can hit the ground running from there, and you get a feel for it. Oh, they can do this project, but I'm not working with them again after this, right? Or we're not getting along, the culture fit is off, something along those lines. You can address it, and then there's not a whole process in doing it again. It's a quick turnover. You can start over. There is a little bit of an investment, obviously, working with anybody, you're going to have that. But when it comes to contractors and freelancers versus the full-time, I mean, you really have to know, if you're doing a full-time hire, that this is someone you want fully integrated into your team for a long time. I mean, I think in order for that kind of investment to make sense, you really have to be sure of that.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, then I want to encourage you to check out the Agency Profitability Toolkit. It's a free set of resources that we've put together to help agency owners just like you improve their profitability. It's full of free checklists, templates, and training videos, and has helped thousands of agencies get better at measuring the essentials of their business. So if you want to grab a free copy of that, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit or look for a link wherever you're watching or listening to this. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing, and that's exactly right. So utilization is the other consideration. If you're thinking about a full-time hire, it's like, what is going to be the cost of the fluctuation in utilization for this person? It's often not considered. And the other thing that I'll say is I think the forcing function of the hourly rate of this freelancer is higher than what it would be if I had a full-time employee that was fully utilized. That I think is a really good forcing function for you to have good pricing hygiene. Because let's imagine it, just like you said, you use a freelance resource for this type of work for 6 months until you really get to a place where you're like, okay, we are consistently selling this. We can generate the pipeline. We know we have the work to justify a full-time person. Well, then you actually just benefit from the full-time hire because ideally it brings your hourly cost down because you've reached that critical mass, but you've priced in more margin than you needed. And now you've actually increased your profitability. So you're getting a real advantage from that hire beyond some of the, other advantages that are more subjective. This is like an objective profitability improvement because you've priced yourself at a place where you can support that work with a freelance resource. So I like it as a forcing function for that. What are some of the other concerns, misconceptions, or bad experiences that you find people have had with freelancers that you unpack a lot at GoWP?
Yeah, I would say really number one is communication. It's so big. It's so big. In order, one of the huge benefits of working with a contractor or freelancer is that it can be super efficient, right? You've got your project scoped out. You just need someone in to tackle the tasks. And if you have it all organized well in a project management tool or something like that, it should be really simple. Even if you have all of that mapped out and ready to go, you need to be able to communicate, and your freelancer needs to communicate as well. That contractor needs to be communicating. One of the biggest pain points we have heard and we've seen ourselves is when you're working with a contractor on Upwork or Fiverr, one of those places, and you hand off the project and you don't hear anything for weeks, maybe, right? Until, okay, here it is, here's the work. And you don't know what's going on. You don't know what the progress is, all of those sorts of lack of communication. So that's a big one. And it's something we are constantly talking about internally on our team and with our network of freelancers. We're constantly reminding daily updates. The way our business model works is agencies get a set number of hours per week with a contractor on a monthly basis. So you're working 10, 20, 30 hours a week with the same contractor month to month. And we tell them all the time, whenever you're working on a client's work, give an update. Say, hey, clocking in, whatever you want to, however you want to say it. Hey, I'm here. This is what I'm working on today. And when you're done for the day, say, hey, heading out. Here's what I got done. Here's what I'll work on tomorrow. If you can set those, and we encourage our clients to set those expectations as well. Like, hey, this is what I want from you. Please do this. And if set the expectations, clear communication, that's the biggest one, because what can happen is there's no communication, resentment starts building up, concern, conflict, all of those sorts of things. And it really just makes a mess, and it's hard to recover from that. So that's a big one. The other thing we hear a lot of is hesitancy to hand work off, to outsource work to someone that they did not source and find and vet themselves. So, oh, my quality work's going to go down. My clients are used to me doing everything. It's going to be obvious. So that's a big one as well. That's just a bottleneck to growth and scaling. That's something any business owner needs to figure out how to get past if they want to grow, right? And that has a lot to do with setting up your SOPs, setting up your processes, and being capable of handing work off in a way that sets the person you're handing it off to up for success.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those two things. And it's, both anecdotal from my own experience and looking at what our clients have gone through. I say this all the time where it's like, it's impossible to over communicate in client services because, to your point, like if you're not controlling the narrative and being clear with what you're working on, the client will come up with their own story, and it's almost never going to be a flattering one. Generally because they'll have had a bad experience. Almost everyone's had a bad experience where you hired somebody and they didn't do what they said they were going to do. You didn't hear from them. They ghosted you. And so that catastrophization starts to happen in their mind if you're not over communicating. But it also goes the other way. I have personally been exposed by freelancers where it's like I outsourced something that we were doing internally. And what that exposed for me was I'm not actually very organized or clear about how this works, but I was able to like the person was in the company. So we were just, that was a crutch, and we were able to make up for it with Slack messages and communication that's not really in the scope or is really appropriate for an outsourced engagement. And so it was a forcing function for me to get my shit together and be more organized and be more clear and have better processes. And I think that can also be a little difficult for somebody that maybe isn't ready for that insight or doesn't arrive at that conclusion that might actually be the problem, that a lot of it comes down to them. And yeah, you have to be more disciplined when you're working with an outsourced firm because you have that a little bit of that healthy separation, and it forces you to have that mutual clarity. So I think those are some really astute insights that I certainly resonate with.
Yeah, absolutely. We see it all the time. So they're easy to identify.
Like when I think about my own experience and other people around me that have had a negative experience with freelancers and contractors, assuming that they found somebody that was capable of doing the job, or the reservations that I hear, the excuses as to why it's like, no, this has to be a full-time hire. Most of the time, there's actually just another issue underneath that. And the full-time hire is a compensation mechanism. And it's, to your point, the processes aren't that clear. We actually don't really have a whole lot of clear definition to the scope of what we do. We don't do a great job of training and onboarding. And so all of that additional context and judgment that someone's able to build just by being in the four walls for 40 hours a week and having, much less friction in terms of communication, that can help fill in those gaps. And when you are forced to outsource this to somebody that doesn't have the surface area for all of those little things to fill in the seams, it really forces you to address those gaps, and it can be difficult. So I would encourage anyone that is listening to this and hasn't already checked out because they think that freelancers aren't right for them, to really assess, like, okay, if I double click on these concerns that I have, do they lead back to an operational principle that is fundamental to the business, that if I addressed it, regardless of if I hired freelancers or full-time employees, the business would be better off because of it, because everyone would be set up for success. And so, yeah, I think that's a really, really important thing that you just touched on at the end there.
Yeah, I think you need to document your process. Anytime you have a process that you're doing, that's an opportunity to hand that process off. That's what I always tell my team. That's what I'm always thinking, like, okay, I do this 12 times a week. Can I document this and hand it off to a VA? Can I document this and hand it off to someone else, right? So whenever you have a process that you're repeating, that's something that really you don't need to be doing working in your business. If you want to be working more on your business, those repeatable processes almost always are something that you can hand off to somebody else.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I have a pricing framework that looks at value and risk. And I think risk is really the big consideration here. And when you're trying to decide between, am I going to buy your hours, or am I going to pay you a flat fee per month or a flat fee for this project? Like, there's a negotiation of risk that's happening there. And it's like, who's taking on the risk in this engagement? And, of course, asking a freelancer to take a flat rate for the project and just give you a price for what you tell them the scope is great. It takes a lot of risk off of you. But if you're not very good at scoping and you don't give them realistic expectations about the scope, or it constantly changes, then there's a really high likelihood the expectations are going to get missed. And it's very unlikely that that person's going to want to work with you next time. You probably only get one, maybe two shots at that if you're lucky. And then that person's going to say, well, I'm not going to work with you anymore because I get a raw deal, right? I'm not getting paid for all the time that I'm spending. And the flip side of that is if you pay by the hour, then you're taking on more risk. And so I think it's important to get an understanding of what is the nature of this work really? How new is it to us? How likely are we to be able to predict the scope of what's going to happen? And how likely is the scope to change? Because sometimes there's just certain types of work that's inherently iterative, and changing the scope as you go is a part of the process. And so you got to keep those things in mind, I think, when you're looking at those different arrangements, so that everybody has a balanced risk profile and you're not having to fight against the contract to get the right result out of the contract, right? Because I'm sure you've seen this before where it's like, well, we agreed to a fixed scope, but now things are changing all the time. And every time something changes, now we have to sit down and renegotiate our engagement. And it's getting in the way of us actually just getting things done. And that's no fun at all.
It is, and it can go on both ends, right? You have change requests from the client that you have to then communicate to the contractor. And if you're limited on either end there can be a lot of push and pull that's working against each other. So it can get really complicated really easily.
So this has been a really insightful conversation. For those that want to learn more about you and GoWP and also what you're doing on the recruiting side, first of all, let's take a moment and let's talk about that. So GoWP historically has been, white label for agencies. You're helping expand their team and give them access to, your team so they can scale faster. What are you doing on the recruiting side? You're launching a new brand there, I think.
Yeah, so we have Quickly Hire is the brand we have launched off of GoWP for our dedicated services and team expansion. So the dedicated developers, copywriters, designers, VAs that we offer through GoWP are managed through Quickly Hire. So that is our new brand, quicklyhire.com. But it's the same services you'll see on GoWP minus the white label managed services of maintenance and content edits. It's the staffing and team expansion side of things. So you can find all of that on Quickly Hire as well. So that's our new brand. And GoWP, you can find us at GoWP.com. And we also have the GoWP Digital Agency Owners Facebook community as well, if folks are interested in joining us there on Facebook.
Awesome. So we'll leave links to all of that in the show notes, to Quickly Hire, to GoWP, to the Facebook community. And with that, any final words of advice for our listeners today, Emily?
I think it all just comes down to those SOPs and communication. I think if people can get that right and get that figured out, growth and team expansion is really just another piece of the puzzle. So it's really just a little bit of upfront work, getting your SOPs down and moving forward with scaling your agency.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you so much for joining us, Emily. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And for those of you listening, thanks for tuning in and let us know what you got from the episode. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Marcel. This is wonderful.